The moment their hands touched, electricity coursed through David's veins. He hadn't felt anything
You
like
look
this since
absolutely
Rachel
stunning
died
tonight.
5 years
Thank
ago.
you. You clean up pretty well
As
yourself.
Victoria
To a
Hayes,
wonderful
the
evening.
commanding CEO who
I've waited
everyone
for this
whispered
moment.
about,
Will you marry
led
me?
him to the dance
Yes,
floor.
of course I will.
He caught a glimpse of his daughter Emma giving him a thumbs up from across the room. What David didn't know was that this dance would change everything, and that by tomorrow morning, his phone would contain a message that would leave him breathless. A proposition that could alter the course of his and Emma's life forever. But it would also force him to confront a question he'd been avoiding for 5 years. Was he allowed to be happy again? And did a man like him deserve someone like her? Friday afternoon sunlight filtered through the dusty blinds of room 204 at Riverside High School, catching dust motes in golden suspension. David Carter stood at the front of his 11th grade English classroom, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, chalk dust on his khaki pants. The clock read 3 p.m., and most of the school had already emptied into the parking lot. But Marcus Johnson remained at his desk, brow furrowed over a copy of Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. The kid was 16, broad-shouldered from the basketball team, but his hands turned the pages with unusual care. Last year, Marcus had been on the edge of dropping out. Now he was reading Steinbeck voluntarily, though the confusion on his face suggested he wasn't quite getting it. "Mr. Carter?" Marcus looked up, frustration evident in the set of his jaw. "Why's Lenny so stupid? I mean, I get that he's got problems, but I don't understand what Steinbeck's trying to say." David pulled a chair around and sat backwards on it, arms folded over the backrest. He'd learned long ago that the best teaching happened when you met students at eye level, not from behind a desk. "You play center on the basketball team, right?" Marcus nodded, uncertain where this was going. Lenny's like a center who doesn't know his own strength. Power without control isn't strength. It's danger waiting to happen. David leaned forward. Lenny's not stupid. He's never had anyone teach him how to channel what he's got. The book isn't about being dumb. It's about what happens when society decides you're not worth the effort of proper guidance. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, understanding dawning like sunrise. "So it's about nobody teaching him different?" Exactly. And that's why education matters. Everyone needs someone who believes in them enough to teach them right. David stood, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "You got it, because you're smart enough to ask the question. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." After Marcus left, David packed his worn leather messenger bag with the stack of essays he needed to grade over the weekend. The bag had been a gift from Rachel on their 5th anniversary, back when they'd thought they had forever. The leather was cracking now, the stitching frayed, but he couldn't bring himself to replace it. Principal Andrews appeared in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back in its customary bun. She smiled, that knowing smile administrators get when they have good news they're proud to deliver. "David, I just got the district literacy scores. Your students are outperforming the state average by 40%. Again." She shook her head in admiration. "I don't know how you do it, but you're working miracles with these kids." David felt heat rise to his cheeks. Compliments always made him uncomfortable. "It's not miracles, Linda. It's just showing up and giving a damn." "Well, whatever it is, keep doing it." After she left, David surveyed his classroom one final time before heading out. The desks bore the scars of 1,000 students, initials carved into wood, stickers peeling from metal legs. His personal library lined the back wall, books he'd bought with his own money because the school's collection hadn't been updated since 1987. Motivational posters he'd printed at the public library hung at odd angles, their corners curling. This was his kingdom. Small, underfunded, but his. His phone buzzed as he locked the classroom door. Jamie's name flashed on the screen. "David, hey man, it's your favorite cousin." My only cousin, David corrected, shouldering his bag as he headed down the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, half of them flickering. Listen, I'm getting married next month. Big wedding at the Grand Meridian Hotel. Sarah's family is loaded. Her dad's a professor, mom's a lawyer. It's going to be fancy as hell. Jamie paused. I know it's not your scene, but you're the only family I've got. Please come. Bring Emma. David pushed through the heavy metal doors into the parking lot, squinting against the late afternoon sun. His 2008 Honda Accord sat in the far corner, paint faded, a dent in the rear bumper from when he'd backed into a shopping cart 2 years ago. Jamie, I don't know. Black tie events aren't really... You're my brother, man. I don't care if you show up in jeans. I need you there. Something in Jamie's voice, vulnerability mixed with hope, made David's resistance crumble. Okay. Yeah, we'll be there. Seriously? Thank you. Emma's going to love it. Tell her there's a chocolate fountain. After they hung up, David sat in his car for a moment, forehead resting against the steering wheel. A wedding at the Grand Meridian. He'd have to rent a tuxedo. Emma would need a dress. The thought of navigating that world, crystal chandeliers and people discussing their summer homes, made his stomach tight. But he'd said yes, and Jamie deserved to have family there. The drive home took 20 minutes through neighborhoods that gentrified block by block. David Street sat firmly in the working class section, where lawnmowers were 20 years old and cars lived in driveways instead of garages. His house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch built in the 1970s, white siding that needed painting, black shutters weathered gray. Inside, Emma sat at the kitchen table, math homework spread before her, chewing on her pencil eraser. At 12, she was caught in that awkward space between childhood and adolescence, 1 foot in each world. Today she wore her favorite purple hoodie, blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail, Rachel's blue eyes staring at equations with fierce concentration. Dad, I don't get this. She pointed at her worksheet. How do you add fractions when the bottom numbers are different? David dropped his bag and moved to the refrigerator, pulling out ingredients for dinner. Rachel's recipe for spaghetti was taped to the inside of the cabinet door, her handwriting still clear after all these years. Let me see. He studied the problem. Your mom was the math genius in this family. I'm just pretending to understand. Emma giggled. Then we'll pretend together. They worked through the problem using pizza slices as examples, cutting imaginary pies into different pieces until the concept clicked. David set water to boil and started browning ground beef, the familiar ritual of cooking Rachel's recipe grounding him in the present. Uncle Jamie called, he said, stirring the meat. He's getting married next month. That's cool. Are we going? Yeah, it's at a fancy hotel, black tie event. Emma's face lit up. Can I get a new dress? We'll go shopping this weekend. She was quiet for a moment, then, You haven't been to anything fancy since Mom died. The observation landed heavier than intended. David focused on the spaghetti sauce, watching tomato paste dissolve into beef. I guess I haven't. Mom always said we should try new things. Emma's voice was careful, testing the waters of a conversation they'd danced around for years. She told me that before at the end. David's hands stilled. The memory of Rachel's final coherent day crashed over him, her in the hospice bed, skin paper thin, but her spirit still fierce. She'd pulled Emma close and whispered words David wasn't supposed to hear but did anyway. When your dad finds someone someday, you help him be brave, okay? Don't let him hide from happiness because he thinks he's being loyal to me. Promise? Emma had nodded, crying, and David had pretended not to notice from the doorway. Now Emma was watching him with those 2 old eyes, wisdom no 12-year-old should possess. Yeah, David managed. She did say that. After dinner, after Emma retreated to her room to video chat with friends, David sat alone in the living room. Photographs lined the mantel. Their wedding day, Emma as a newborn, family vacations to state parks they could afford. Rachel smiled from every frame, frozen in moments of joy that felt both impossibly close and unreachably distant. The wedding invitation sat on the coffee table, heavy cream cardstock embossed with gold lettering. He picked it up, running his thumb over Jamie's name. 5 years. Was that long enough? Too long? There was no manual for this, no timeline that made sense. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Rachel, he whispered to the empty room. Being around happy people, celebrating love. It feels like I'm supposed to be over you by now, but I'm not sure I want to be. The house settled around him, old beams creaking, the furnace kicking on. No answers came, just the familiar silence of evening. The Grand Meridian Hotel rose from downtown like a monument to wealth, all glass and steel and tasteful landscaping. David stood in the valet circle in his rented tuxedo, tugging at the bow tie that felt like a noose. The jacket pinched across his shoulders. He'd lost weight since the last time he'd worn formal wear, but rental places didn't have many options in his price range. Emma emerged from the car in a deep purple dress they'd found on sale at Macy's, her hair professionally styled for the first time in her life. She looked older, poised, and David's heart clenched at how much she resembled Rachel. You look beautiful, sweetheart. You look like you're going to throw up, she replied, straightening his collar. It's just a wedding, Dad. Relax. Inside, the ballroom took his breath away. Cathedral ceilings soared overhead, 3 massive chandeliers casting prismatic light across tables draped in ivory silk. Ice sculptures of swans flanked a champagne fountain. Guests milled in clusters, the men in tuxedos that actually fit, the women in gowns that cost more than David's monthly mortgage. A hostess directed them to table 19, tucked in the far corner near the kitchen doors. David felt Emma's hand slip into his. This is amazing, she breathed, eyes wide. Their table mates introduced themselves. Dr. Peterson, a dentist, and his wife, Professor Carmichael from the university, an elderly couple named the Hendersons, who looked as out of place as David felt. Conversation hummed around expensive dental work and upcoming sabbaticals. Someone mentioned their Aspen timeshare. Another discussed their new Porsche. David nodded politely and focused on not spilling his water. The ceremony was brief and elegant. D.A. looked happy, his bride Sarah radiant in vintage lace. They exchanged vows. David tried not to compare to his own wedding day. The reception kicked off with their first dance, then cake cutting, then speeches that were witty and warm. Throughout it all, David found his gaze drifting to the entrance, where late arrivals trickled in. He wasn't watching for anyone in particular, just observing the pageantry of wealth and celebration that existed in a stratosphere far above his own life. At 8:30, the ballroom doors opened one final time. The woman who entered didn't make a grand entrance. She simply walked in, but conversations quieted in her wake. She was tall, probably 5'10", with dark hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her midnight blue gown caught the light as she moved, fitted perfectly to a frame that spoke of personal trainers and nutritionists, but it was her bearing that commanded attention, the way she held herself with absolute certainty, as if she owned not just the room, but the very air within it. People approached her immediately, handshakes, air kisses, the deference usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. Mrs. Henderson leaned toward David, lowering her voice. That's Victoria Hayes, CEO of Hayes Innovation, one of the most powerful women in the country, worth billions, they say. She's the bride's godmother. David watched Victoria navigate the social minefield with practiced ease. She smiled at something a white-haired man said, the expression reaching her eyes in a way that suggested genuine warmth beneath the polished exterior. When she laughed, the sound carried across the room, rich and unguarded, and somehow surprising. "Dad, you're staring." Emma's voice snapped him back to reality. Heat crept up his neck. "I'm not staring. I'm just observing." "You're totally staring." Emma grinned, that knowing look she got when she thought she understood something adults tried to hide. "She's pretty." "She's successful," David corrected, as if that distinction mattered. The band transitioned to dancing music. Couples flooded the floor, inhibitions loosening with each glass of champagne. Emma bounced in her seat, watching the lights and movement with undisguised delight. "You should dance, Dad." "I don't dance anymore, Em." "You haven't danced since Mom died." "Not even at Uncle Rob's wedding last year." Her voice went soft. "Mom loved dancing. She'd want you to." The truth of it sat heavy in his chest. Rachel had taught him to dance in their apartment living room when they were engaged, laughing at his two left feet, patient as he stepped on her toes. They'd danced at their wedding, at friend celebrations, slow dancing in the kitchen while Emma played in her high chair. The band started a slow ballad, something romantic with a gentle sway. David recognized it, one of Rachel's favorites. Memories flooded in, unbidden. Rachel in his arms, head on his shoulder, humming along. Emma as a toddler standing on his shoes as they swayed. The last time they'd danced, at a hospital fundraiser 6 months before her diagnosis, neither of them knowing how little time remained. He was so lost in the past that he didn't notice someone approaching until a shadow fell across the table. "You look like you could use some company." David looked up, startled to find Victoria Hayes standing beside table 19, a slight smile playing on her lips. Up close, she was even more striking, intelligent hazel eyes, high cheekbones, a presence that was simultaneously intimidating and magnetic. Words failed him. His brain short-circuited somewhere between forming a coherent thought and actually speaking. I'm just waiting for my daughter." Victoria's gaze shifted to Emma, who was conspicuously absent, then swept the room. "The spirited young lady in the purple dress? I believe I saw her engaged in an animated conversation with the groom's younger brother by the chocolate fountain." David craned his neck and spotted Emma indeed chatting with a boy about her age, both of them laughing over some shared joke. Great. Now he had 2 things to worry about. "I'm Victoria." She extended her hand, and David scrambled to his feet, nearly knocking over his water glass in the process. "David Carter. I'm Jamie's cousin." "Ah, family. I'm just the godmother, practically an honorary aunt." She paused, studying him with an intensity that made him feel transparent, as if she could see straight through the rented tuxedo to the worn shirt underneath. "You don't seem to be enjoying yourself much, David Carter." The observation was so accurate, it stripped away his impulse to lie. "Large gatherings aren't really my thing. I'm more comfortable in a classroom full of teenagers than a room full of adults." "You're a teacher." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "High school English." Instead of the polite nod and quick exit he expected, the usual response when people at events like this discovered he wasn't in finance or law, Victoria's eyes lit up. "English was my favorite subject in school." "What texts are you teaching this semester?" Before David knew it, they were deep in conversation about literature. Victoria's knowledge surprised him. She discussed Steinbeck with genuine passion, argued the merits of Hemingway versus Faulkner, asked thoughtful questions about engaging modern students with classic texts. "The problem with most STEM initiatives," she said, leaning against the table, "is they ignore the foundation. Without strong literacy skills, even the best science program will fail." That's why teachers like you are crucial. David couldn't remember the last time he'd had such an engaging conversation at a social event. Most people's eyes glazed over when he mentioned teaching. Victoria not only understood the challenges, but had clearly thought deeply about education reform. The band transitioned to a familiar melody, a classic slow dance from his college years. Victoria stopped mid-sentence, listening. "I love this song." She turned to him, and the shift in her demeanor was subtle but significant. The CEO fell away, replaced by something more vulnerable. She extended her hand toward him, and the gesture felt weighted with more than simple invitation. "Dance with me." Not a question, not quite a command. Something in between, an offer that felt impossible to decline despite every instinct screaming at him to retreat to the safety of table 19. "I haven't danced in years," David admitted, hesitation thick in his voice. The admission cost him something, laying bare a wound he'd kept carefully covered. "Then it's about time you started again, don't you think?" Before he could formulate another excuse, David found himself taking her hand. It was softer than he expected, but her grip was firm. As she led him toward the dance floor, he caught sight of Emma watching from across the room, her eyes wide with disbelief, before she broke into an encouraging grin and threw him an enthusiastic thumbs up. His anxiety peaked as they reached the center of the floor. What was he doing? He was about to make a fool of himself in front of one of the most successful women in the country, in front of Jamie's entire wedding, in front of everyone who would see exactly how much he didn't belong in this world. Victoria must have sensed his panic because she squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Just follow my lead." She placed his hand on her waist, took his other hand in hers, and somehow, miraculously, his body remembered. Rachel had taught him this. Senior prom, their wedding, dancing in the kitchen while Emma giggled from her high chair. The muscle memory was still there, buried beneath 5 years of grief and avoidance. They began to move together, stiff at first, but with each passing measure, David felt himself relax into the rhythm. Victoria was an excellent dancer, guiding him subtly when needed, but allowing him space to find his own flow. "See? It's like riding a bicycle," she murmured, close enough that he caught the scent of her perfume, something subtle and expensive that suited her perfectly. "A very wobbly bicycle," David managed, surprised at his own capacity for humor in this moment. "You're too hard on yourself, David Carter. That seems to be a pattern with you." He looked at her, genuinely surprised. "We just met. How could you possibly know that?" Victoria's smile held understanding. "I'm good at reading people. It's part of my job. And you have the look of someone who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, but never asks for help." The accuracy of her assessment left him momentarily speechless. Around them, other couples swayed and spun, but David barely noticed. It felt as if they existed in their own bubble, the rest of the wedding reception fading to background noise. The words came before he could stop them, pulled out by her perceptiveness and the strange intimacy of the moment. "My wife died 5 years ago. Cancer. Since then, it's just been Emma and me." Victoria's expression softened, and he saw genuine empathy there, not pity. "I'm sorry for your loss. That couldn't have been easy." It wasn't. Isn't, he corrected himself, because grief wasn't past tense. It was a companion that lived in his chest, sometimes quiet, sometimes overwhelming, always present. "But Emma's amazing. She's the reason I get up every morning." "She seems like a remarkable young woman." "You've clearly done a wonderful job raising her." Pride swelled in David's chest, the one thing he knew without doubt he'd gotten right. "She makes it easy. Most days, anyway. The teenage years are just beginning, so ask me again in a few years." Victoria laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. I have a feeling you'll navigate those waters just fine." As they continued to dance, David found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't in years. When he dared to twirl Victoria at one point, she rewarded him with a delighted laugh that made something in his chest unfurl. The song ended too soon. They stood in the middle of the dance floor, still holding hands, and David felt the loss of the moment like a physical thing. "Thank you for the dance," Victoria said, her voice softer than before. "Thank you for asking." She glanced around, seeming to notice for the first time that several people were watching them with curious expressions. "I think we've become the subject of gossip." "Let them talk. I've never much cared for other people's opinions of my personal life." The confidence in her statement reminded him of the gulf between them. She could afford not to care what people thought. He lived in a world where reputation mattered, where whispers affected job prospects and social standing. Before he could respond, the band started up again with a more upbeat number. Victoria raised an eyebrow in question. "One more?" David hesitated for only a heartbeat before nodding. Why not? When would he ever get a chance like this again? One dance turned into 3, then 4. They took a break for drinks, during which Emma approached with the confidence of youth, undaunted by billion-dollar CEOs. "Hi, I'm Emma. You're a really good dancer." Victoria shook her hand solemnly. "Your father is a wonderful dancer. You should be proud." "I am. He's the best dad in the world." As the evening progressed, David discovered layers beneath Victoria's polished exterior. She told him about growing up in rural Ohio, her mother working 3 jobs to keep them afloat, about working her way through state college, teaching herself to code in public libraries because they couldn't afford a computer, about the challenges of being a woman in tech, fighting for every inch of respect in boardrooms full of men who assumed she was someone's assistant. He shared stories about his students, the daily struggles of underfunded schools, his dreams of someday writing a novel. They talked about books and philosophy, about what made life meaningful versus what made it profitable. She challenged his assumptions and he questioned hers, and the intellectual sparring felt exhilarating. When the reception finally began to wind down near midnight, David realized with a start that he'd spent almost the entire evening with Victoria. Emma had made friends with several of the younger guests and was currently saying her goodbyes with hugs and promises to connect on social media. "I should get Emma home," David said reluctantly as they stood near the exit. "She has soccer practice tomorrow morning." Victoria nodded, and he caught a flicker of disappointment crossing her features before her composure returned. "Of course. It was a pleasure meeting you, David. Truly." "Likewise." They stood there, and the moment stretched awkward. Was this it? A pleasant evening that would fade into memory? 2 people from different worlds intersecting briefly before returning to their separate orbits? Victoria seemed to be thinking the same thing because she hesitated, then reached into her clutch and pulled out a business card. Her movements were decisive, but he noticed the slightest tremor in her fingers. "My personal number is on the back, in case you ever want to continue our discussion about Steinbeck versus Hemingway." David took the card, hope rising in his chest like a tide. "I'd like that." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and that electric feeling from their first touch returned. For a moment, they just looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Possibility, potential, the tentative acknowledgement that whatever this was, neither wanted it to end here. "Dad, I'm ready." Emma's voice broke the spell. Victoria stepped back, her professional mask sliding into place, but her eyes held warmth. "Good night, David Carter. Good night, Emma." "Good night, Ms. Hayes." In the car, Emma was too wired to sleep despite the late hour. She chattered about the wedding, the chocolate fountain, the boy she'd met who went to a private school across town and played lacrosse. "You like her," Emma stated simply, breaking through her own monologue. David glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. She's a very interesting person. Dad? Emma's tone made it clear she wasn't buying his attempt at nonchalance. I saw how you looked at her. It's okay, you know. Mom would want you to be happy. The words, spoken with such certainty, hit him square in the chest. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, and he was grateful for the darkness hiding his face. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. I get it from Mom, she replied with a cheeky grin visible in the mirror. David laughed despite the emotions churning in his gut. That you do, sweetheart. That you do. At home, after tucking Emma into bed, a ritual she was growing too old for but still indulged him in, David sat on the edge of his own bed, turning Victoria's business card over in his hands. Heavy stock, minimalist design, her name embossed in simple black letters. On the back, written in elegant script, was a phone number with no area code designation, as if she assumed anyone calling would know. The thought of calling her both excited and terrified him. What would someone like Victoria Hayes see in a high school teacher with a mortgage and a Honda Accord? They lived in different universes. She probably spent more on coffee in a month than he made in a week. But then he remembered how easily conversation had flowed between them, how she'd looked at him with genuine interest, not the polite attention people gave before finding an excuse to move along, how it had felt to dance with her, to laugh with her, to forget for a few hours that he was supposed to be just going through the motions of life. With a deep breath, David picked up his phone and typed out a message, revising it 3 times before settling on simplicity. This is David from the wedding. I really enjoyed our conversations tonight. Would you be interested in continuing them over coffee sometime? His finger hovered over the send button for several long moments. This was crazy. She probably got messages from important people all day long. Why would she want to meet a teacher for coffee? But Emma's words echoed in his mind. Mom would want you to be happy. And he pressed send before he could overthink it any further. He set his phone down, telling himself not to expect a response until morning at the earliest. Important people like Victoria Hayes didn't check their phones at midnight. She probably had an assistant who filtered her messages, screening out random teachers she danced with at weddings. His phone buzzed. David grabbed it so fast he nearly dropped it. I was hoping you'd text. Coffee sounds perfect. How about tomorrow afternoon? There's a little place near Riverside Park that makes excellent cappuccinos. But David, I have a proposition for you that might change everything. More details when we meet. He stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure he hadn't imagined it. A proposition? His mind raced with possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. What kind of proposition could a tech CEO possibly have for a high school English teacher? David typed back quickly. Tomorrow works. What time? 2 p.m.? The cafe is called Riverside Corner, appropriate given your school's name. Perfect. See you then. He lay back on his bed, phone still clutched in his hand, a smile spreading across his face. For the first time in 5 years, he felt something he thought was lost forever. Possibility. The future had been a gray expanse to endure, each day bleeding into the next in an endless routine of teaching and parenting and simply surviving Rachel's absence. Now, suddenly, tomorrow held promise. Sleep came slowly, his mind replaying the evening, Victoria's laugh, the way she'd looked at him like he mattered, the electric touch of her hand. He thought about Rachel, too, about the promise he'd made to her that he would keep living, would let himself be happy again someday. Maybe someday had arrived. Saturday afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of Riverside Corner Cafe, illuminating shelves lined with used books and local art. David arrived 20 minutes early, unable to sit at home with his nerves jumping. The cafe was exactly the kind of place he'd choose himself. Mismatched furniture, the smell of fresh ground coffee, a chalkboard menu written in careful script. Not pretentious, just authentic. He ordered a black coffee and claimed a table by the window, watching pedestrians pass on the sidewalk outside. Twice he pulled out his phone to text Victoria that something had come up, that he couldn't make it, that this whole thing was a mistake. Twice he put the phone away. At exactly 2 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Victoria walked in wearing dark jeans and a cream cashmere sweater, her hair down in soft waves around her shoulders. Without the formal gown and updo, she looked more approachable, though no less striking. She spotted him immediately and smiled, and David felt his anxiety ease fractionally. "Hello again." She slid into the seat across from him, setting down a leather portfolio that probably cost more than his car payment. "Hello?" The word came out rougher than intended. He cleared his throat. "You look nice. Different from last night." "So do you. Much more relaxed than the tuxedo." After she ordered her cappuccino, Victoria turned her full attention to him, and David understood how people might find that focus intimidating. She didn't just look at you. She saw you, analyzed you, cataloged every detail. "So, about that proposition I mentioned." David leaned forward, curiosity overriding his nerves. "I've been wondering about that all night." "Hayes Innovation has an education foundation. We fund STEM programs in underserved schools across the country." She paused as the barista delivered her cappuccino, thanking him with genuine warmth. "But we're failing. We throw money at schools and nothing really changes. Test scores don't improve, dropout rates stay the same. We need someone who understands teaching from the ground up, not from a boardroom." David listened, trying to piece together where this was heading. Victoria opened her portfolio and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "I want to create a new position. Director of Educational Impact. You'd design literacy programs, train teachers across the country, work with administrators to implement sustainable change. Most importantly, you'd help shape policy on a national level, influence how reading and writing are taught in thousands of schools." She slid a paper across the table. At the top, in bold numbers, was a salary figure that made David's coffee go down wrong. He coughed, eyes watering. $185,000. He made $58,000 teaching at Riverside. He couldn't finish the sentence. His mind was reeling, trying to comprehend that kind of money. Emma's college fund, repairs on the house, maybe even a new car that didn't require constant maintenance. That's a significant increase. Victoria's expression remained neutral, professional. "The position demands a lot. You'd travel to schools nationwide, sometimes for a week at a time. You'd work with teachers and administrators, develop curriculum frameworks, attend conferences. But you'd also have flexibility. Remote work when you're not traveling. Schedule control to accommodate Emma's needs. You'd report to the foundation board, not directly to me." The last part felt important, like she was establishing boundaries before he could worry about them. David set down his cup, trying to organize the chaos in his head. "Why me? We just met. There must be hundreds of qualified educators who'd jump at this opportunity." "I researched you." Victoria's directness was refreshing after a lifetime of people dancing around uncomfortable truths. "This morning. Your student standardized test scores are 40% above district averages. Principal Andrews says you've revolutionized engagement in your school. You've published 3 articles in education journals about reaching reluctant readers. Articles that practicing teachers actually cite because they're practical, not theoretical." She pulled out printouts of his published work, annotated with highlighter. You're exactly who we need. Someone who's been in the trenches, who understands what actually works versus what sounds good in a grant proposal. David stared at the evidence of her research. She'd done this in less than 24 hours? I love teaching. Being in the classroom, seeing students' faces when something clicks. This would still be teaching, David, just on a larger scale. Victoria leaned forward, intensity radiating from her. You'd be helping shape educational policy, influencing how literacy is taught nationwide. Think about how many more students you could reach. The warmth of her hand on his sent electricity up his arm, but it was her words that really landed. How many Marcus Johnsons were out there, struggling in systems that had given up on them? How many could he help if he had the resources and platform this position offered? And us? The question escaped before he could censor it. Last night felt like something. Would working for your foundation complicate that? Victoria didn't flinch from the question. Probably. But I can't stop thinking about you. The job offer is real and separate from whatever this is between us. Take the position or don't. But I want to see you again, regardless. She leaned in, close enough that he could smell her perfume again, and kissed him. It was brief, gentle, but it left him breathless. His first kiss since Rachel, and it felt simultaneously like betrayal and homecoming. Think about the job, Victoria murmured, pulling back. But also think about this. Then she was gathering her portfolio, standing, leaving him sitting in the cafe with his world turned upside down. The drive home was a blur. David's mind ping-ponged between the job offer and that kiss, unable to process either fully. $185,000. National policy influence. Victoria Hayes kissing him in a coffee shop like it was the most natural thing in the world. At home, he found Emma and Mrs. Patel, their neighbor, a retired teacher who watched Emma when needed, waiting on the porch. Emma's eyes were bright with curiosity. How's your date? Did you kiss her? Are you going to see her again? Mrs. Patel smiled knowingly. I'll leave you two to talk. After she left, David ushered Emma inside, trying to figure out how to explain something he barely understood himself. It wasn't exactly a date. We discussed a potential job opportunity. Emma's eyes widened. A job? What kind of job? They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where they did homework, ate breakfast, had their most important conversations, and David explained everything. The foundation, the position, the travel requirements, the salary that was more money than either of them had ever imagined. Emma listened quietly, processing. When he finished, she asked the question that cut straight to the heart of it. Would you be happier? David hadn't expected that. I don't know, sweetheart. I'm pretty happy teaching at Riverside. But you always say there are so many kids the system fails. You say the bureaucracy makes it impossible to help everyone who needs it. Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, not accusatory. This could let you fix the system, right? Instead of just working inside it? Sometimes his daughter's clarity stunned him. Maybe. Yeah, maybe it could. And you like Victoria. I could tell. She likes you too. Heat crept up David's neck. The job and Victoria are separate considerations. Emma rolled her eyes with all the dramatic flair of approaching adolescence. Dad, they're totally connected. She offered you the job because she likes you too. It's obvious. It's more complicated than that, Em. Adults always say things are complicated when they're actually simple. Emma stood, heading toward the refrigerator for a snack. You like her, she likes you. You want to help more kids, she's offering you away. What's complicated? After Emma went to her room, David sat on the back porch as evening settled over the neighborhood. Crickets chirped in the overgrown grass he kept meaning to mow. The neighbor's dog barked at shadows. Life continued its ordinary rhythm while David's world tilted on its axis. He thought about Rachel, about what she'd want. They'd been partners in every decision, talking through options until they found consensus. This was the first truly life-altering choice he faced alone. "I could use some guidance here, Rachel." His voice barely carried past the porch railing. "This could change everything for Emma and me. Financial security, the chance to impact thousands of kids instead of a few classrooms. But it means leaving Riverside, leaving the students I know need me. It means taking a risk on something unknown." The stars emerged one by one overhead. No answers came, just the familiar ache of her absence. His phone buzzed. Victoria's name lit the screen. "Whatever you decide about the job, I'd like to see you again. No pressure, no expectations. Just dinner, conversation, and maybe another dance." David smiled despite his confusion, some of the weight lifting from his shoulders. He didn't have to figure everything out tonight. He could take this one step at a time. "Dinner sounds perfect. When? Thursday? There's an Italian place downtown I think you'd like. Nothing too fancy, I promise. It's a date." He sent it before he could overthink, then stared at the screen. Did he just call it a date? Was that presumptuous? Too forward? Victoria's response came immediately. "Yes, it is." The emoji made him laugh. A billionaire CEO using smiley faces. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe things weren't as complicated as he was making them. The following Tuesday, David found himself in the gleaming headquarters of Hayes Innovation, 40 stories of glass and steel in the financial district. Security waved Victoria through without checking ID. She led him to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a view that probably cost more per square foot than his entire house. 8 people waited around a massive walnut table, the foundation board. Victoria introduced him to each: tech executives, education policy experts, philanthropy directors. They were polite but skeptical, their expensive suits and perfectly styled hair a stark contrast to David's 10-year-old blazer that was slightly too tight across the shoulders. "David has 14 years of classroom experience at Riverside High," Victoria began, pulling up a presentation on the wall-sized screen. "His students outperform state averages by 40% in literacy assessments." A man named Harrison, 50s, silver hair, Armani suit, leaned back in his leather chair. "With all due respect, Mr. Carter, classroom teaching is very different from large-scale program design. What's your background in curriculum development, educational policy, grant administration?" The condescension in his voice was barely concealed. David felt heat rise in his chest, the familiar anger that came from being underestimated. "You're right. It is different." David stood, surprising himself with the movement. "In classrooms, you can't hide behind data. You see immediately when something doesn't work, when a student's eyes glaze over because your method is failing them." He moved to the window, looking down at the city sprawling below. 3 years ago, I had a student named Marcus, 16 years old, reading at 5th grade level. Your foundation gave our school $50,000 for technology, iPads, smart boards, all the latest gadgets. David turned to face the board, meeting each person's eyes. "You know what we actually needed? Books. A reading specialist. Time to work one-on-one with struggling students. Instead, I watched your foundation spend money on equipment that sat in locked cabinets because nobody knew how to integrate it into curriculum." The room went silent. Victoria's expression was unreadable. "I've watched well-meaning foundations make the same mistakes for over a decade. Programs designed by people who haven't set foot in a classroom since they were students themselves. Beautiful binders full of buzzwords that teachers throw away because they're impractical, disconnected from reality. David grabbed his bag from the chair. I appreciate the opportunity, but I don't think I'm the right fit. I care too much to watch another well-intentioned foundation waste money while actual kids fall through the cracks. He started toward the door. Sit down, Mr. Carter. The voice belonged to Margaret Chen, the board chair, 60s, former principal, sharp eyes behind designer glasses. David paused, hand on the door handle. That's exactly why we need you. Margaret's voice was firm. We've been making those mistakes for years because nobody had the courage to call us on it. This board votes on hiring decisions by majority. Show of hands, who wants to offer Mr. Carter the position? 7 hands went up. Only Harrison abstained, his jaw tight with barely suppressed irritation. David stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. He'd essentially told them they were incompetent, walked out of the interview, and they'd hired him anyway? After the board members filed out, Victoria caught him in the hallway. Her heels clicked on the polished marble as she approached. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed in a board meeting. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. She cut him off with a kiss, deeper than the one in the cafe, less tentative. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. Don't apologize. You were magnificent. That passion is exactly why I wanted you for this position. You're not angry? I'm half in love with you, Victoria said, then froze as the words registered. Her professional composure cracked, vulnerability showing through. I didn't mean to say that out loud. David's heart hammered against his ribs. Only half, she laughed, tension breaking. Okay, maybe more than half. They stood in the empty hallway of her company headquarters, grinning at each other like teenagers, while around them the machinery of industry hummed along, oblivious to the seismic shift happening in this small moment. That evening, David explained the board meeting to Emma over leftover spaghetti. She listened with increasing excitement as he described his outburst, the vote, Victoria's reaction. So you're taking it? Emma's voice was bright with anticipation. You're going to be a director? I think so. It's scary, but... He trailed off, trying to articulate the feeling growing in his chest. Maybe it's time for something new. Emma's face suddenly closed, the brightness fading. Would you have to travel a lot? Sometimes. Maybe once a month for a few days. Oh. The single syllable carried unexpected weight. David set down his fork. What's wrong? Nothing. It's fine. Emma pushed food around her plate, not meeting his eyes. Talk to me. What if I don't want you to take it? The words came out in a rush, Emma's composure crumbling. It's just us, Dad. We don't need more money. I don't care about a college fund or fixing the roof. I care that you'll be gone and everything will change. Her voice cracked on the last word, and David's heart shattered. He'd been so focused on the opportunity, he hadn't considered how the travel might affect Emma. Of course she was scared. Her mother had died. Her world had already been torn apart once. Now her father was talking about being away regularly. Emma stood abruptly, tears in her eyes. Mom died and left us. Now you're leaving too. She ran to her room before David could respond, the door slamming with finality. David sat alone at the kitchen table, the enormity of his mistake settling over him. He'd been thinking about career advancement and financial security, about helping more students on a broader scale. He hadn't been thinking about what mattered most, the one student who needed him every single day. Mrs. Patel appeared at the back door, having heard the commotion through the shared fence. She let herself in with the familiarity of years. She's scared, the older woman said gently, pouring herself tea from David's kettle without asking. Her mother died. You're her entire world. Of course change terrifies her. I don't know what to do. David rubbed his face, exhaustion pulling at him. This opportunity could change our lives, but not at the cost of losing Emma's trust. Then talk to her. Really talk. Not parent to child, but person to person. After Mrs. Patel left, David stood outside Emma's door for a full minute before knocking. "Can I come in?" Silence, then a muffled, "Okay." Emma sat on her bed, surrounded by stuffed animals she was too old for but couldn't give up. Her eyes were red, face blotchy from crying. David sat beside her, and the words came harder than any speech he'd given in a classroom. "You're right. Things will change. But some things never will." He took her hand. "You're my priority, Emma. Always. No job, no amount of money, nothing is more important than you." "But you'll be in other cities for meetings, traveling to schools." "You won't have time for me. Then we make new promises. I won't miss soccer games. Sunday pancakes stay sacred. Homework help, bedtime talks, all our traditions. Those don't change." David squeezed her hand gently. "And about Victoria? If this keeps going, if she becomes part of our lives, how do you feel about that?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. She's nice, but she's not Mom." "No one will ever be Mom. Victoria isn't trying to be. But maybe there's room in our lives for new people while still keeping Mom right here." He touched his chest over his heart. Emma softened slightly, but uncertainty remained in her eyes. "What if I really don't want you to take the job?" "Then I won't. You get a vote in this family. A real vote. Not just me pretending to listen." "Really?" "Really." Emma leaned against him, and David wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They sat like that in silence, the weight of the decision hanging between them. "Can I think about it?" Emma asked finally. "Take all the time you need." A week later, David invited Victoria to dinner at his house, the first time she'd see where and how he actually lived. He was acutely aware of everything she'd notice: the worn furniture, the dated kitchen, the modest 3-bedroom ranch that probably cost less than her car. Emma had agreed to the dinner with visible reluctance, and David's nerves were on edge as he cooked Rachel's lasagna recipe, while Emma set the table with silent efficiency. The doorbell rang at 6:30 precisely. Victoria stood on the porch holding flowers and a wrapped package. She dressed down, jeans, a simple blouse, clearly attempting to be less intimidating, though her natural elegance made casual look expensive. "For the house," she handed David the flowers. "And this is for Emma." Emma accepted the package warily, unwrapping it to reveal a hardcover box set of Percy Jackson books. "Your dad mentioned you like adventure stories. These were my favorites when I was your age." "Thank you." Emma's voice was polite but cool. She set the books on the coffee table without opening them. Dinner was an exercise in awkward silences. David tried to facilitate conversation, but Emma gave one-word answers to Victoria's questions. Yes, she played soccer. No, she didn't know what position she liked best. The food was good, thanks. Victoria gamely continued trying, asking about school, hobbies, favorite subjects. Emma responded with the bare minimum courtesy required. When Victoria mentioned the Foundation's pilot program timeline, Emma's fork clattered against her plate. "So Dad's definitely taking the job?" The question hung in the air. David and Victoria exchanged glances. "We're still discussing it," David said carefully. "Sounds like it's already decided." Emma stood abruptly. "May I be excused?" She disappeared to her room before either adult could respond. Victoria set down her napkin, distress evident despite her attempts to maintain composure. "She hates me. She doesn't hate you. She's scared. Of me? Of losing me. Of everything changing. She's been through a lot, Victoria. Her whole world imploded when her mom died. Stability matters to her more than anything. Victoria was quiet, staring at her barely touched plate. Maybe I'm pushing too hard. The job offer, us, meeting Emma. I'm not good at reading these situations. In business, you move fast or lose opportunities, but this isn't business. David reached across the table, taking her hand. You're doing fine. Emma just needs time. And if she never comes around? Victoria's voice dropped. I won't be the reason you lose your daughter, David. I can't be that person. From the hallway came a small sound. Emma listening. David caught the shadow of her movement through the doorway. After Victoria left with a subdued goodbye, David found Emma sitting on the stairs. I heard what she said about not wanting to come between us. Is she going to be your girlfriend? The direct question deserved an honest answer. I don't know. Maybe. Would that be okay? I don't want to share you. Emma's voice was small, younger than her 12 years. It's been just us for so long. You'll never have to share me. There's enough room in my heart for both of you. Different kinds of love, different places. Promise you won't forget Mom? Never. She's part of who I am, part of who you are. Nothing and no one could change that. Emma considered this, chewing her bottom lip the way she did when working through difficult problems. Okay, I'll try. With Victoria. But I need you to promise something else. Anything. If you take this job, you have to keep your promises. The important stuff. You have to be there. I will. I swear it. She hugged him then, fierce and tight, and David held his daughter close, hoping he could keep the promises he was making. 2 weeks later, David stood in his classroom at Riverside for the last time as a full-time teacher. He'd given his notice to Principal Andrews, who'd been disappointed but understanding. You're going to change lives on a scale I can only dream of, she'd said, hugging him goodbye. The news had spread through the school quickly. Students stopped him in hallways to say goodbye, to thank him, to tell him he'd made a difference. Each interaction felt like a small knife to the chest. These kids needed him, and he was leaving. Marcus caught him after the final bell, anger and hurt warring on his face. You're really going? For some corporate job? David gestured to the chairs, and they sat the way they had 100 times before. I'm going because there are thousands of students like you who deserve better than what the system gives them. I'm going to fight to change that system from the inside. Who's going to teach us the way you do? I'll find someone good, and I'll make sure they have resources I never had. Proper books, adequate support, time to actually teach instead of just test prep. Marcus's eyes were shining. You better not forget about us. Never. David pulled the kid into a hug. You're the reason I'm doing this. On his last day, the students threw a surprise farewell party. Homemade cards covered his desk, each one a punch to the gut. Best teacher ever. You changed my life. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. After everyone left, David walked through his empty classroom one final time. He touched the scarred desks, the bookshelves he'd filled himself, the motivational posters now faded and curling. This had been his kingdom for 14 years. Tomorrow, he'd step into a corporate office and try to change education from the outside. I hope I'm doing the right thing, he whispered to the empty room. On his desk sat Rachel's photo, the one he carried everywhere. Her laughing at their wedding, joy radiating from every pixel. What would you do, Rach? His phone rang, shattering the moment. Victoria's name flashed on screen. There's an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. Harrison is making a move to block your hiring. Something about improper vetting procedures. We need you there." David's stomach dropped. But the vote already happened. "He's found a procedural loophole. Just be there at 9. We'll fight this together." The next morning, David returned to Hayes Innovation headquarters with dread coiling in his gut. The same conference room, the same board members, but the atmosphere was charged with tension. Harrison stood at the head of the table with a presentation already loaded. "Mr. Carter lacks the credentials this position demands. No graduate degree in education, no experience in policy work, no corporate management background." He clicked through slides showing other candidates, PhDs from prestigious universities, published authors, consultants with impressive resumes. These candidates have spent careers building expertise in large-scale educational reform. Mr. Carter, while I'm sure a competent classroom teacher, simply doesn't have the qualifications we need. Board members shifted uncomfortably. Margaret Chen's expression was neutral, revealing nothing. Harrison continued, his voice dripping false sympathy. "Additionally, we should discuss Ms. Hayes' relationship with the candidate. Are we hiring based on merit, or are there other factors influencing this decision?" The implication landed like a grenade. Heads turned toward Victoria, whose jaw tightened. "My relationship with David has no bearing on his qualifications," Victoria said, voice cold as winter, "which are extensive and proven through results, not just credentials on paper." "Nevertheless," Harrison pressed, "the appearance of impropriety—" David stood, the chair scraping loudly against marble. Anger burned white-hot in his chest. "You want credentials? Let me tell you what I have." He walked to the window, then turned to face the board. 14 years of reaching kids everyone else had given up on. Marcus Johnson, who couldn't read at grade level 3 years ago, just got accepted to community college with a scholarship. Shayna Martinez, whose home life was a nightmare, found refuge in my classroom. She's studying social work now, wants to help kids like she was. His voice grew stronger. "I don't have a PhD, but I have a 40% improvement in literacy scores in one of the poorest districts in this state. I have students who come back years later to thank me for being the first person who believed they could succeed." David planted his hands on the table, leaning forward. "You want someone who looks impressive on paper? Hire one of Harrison's consultants. They'll give you beautiful binders full of research-backed strategies that teachers will ignore because they're designed by people who haven't faced a struggling student in 20 years. He straightened, grabbing his bag. "But if you want someone who will actually change outcomes, who understands what works in real classrooms with real kids, then you know where to find me." Before anyone could respond, Margaret Chen cleared her throat. "Mr. Harrison, there's something the board should know. You sit on the board of Wilson Consulting, correct?" Harrison's face paled slightly. "That's public information, yes." "Wilson Consulting bid on this contract 3 months ago. We rejected their proposal in favor of creating an internal position. Would you say that represents a conflict of interest?" The room erupted in murmurs. Harrison sputtered, trying to formulate a response. "This board votes now," Margaret declared. "All in favor of retaining David Carter as Director of Educational Impact?" 7 hands rose immediately. Harrison abstained, his face flushed with humiliation. "Motion carries. Mr. Carter, welcome to Hayes Foundation. Mr. Harrison, you're removed from the Education Committee pending ethics review." In the parking garage afterward, Victoria found David leaning against his Honda, trying to process what had happened. "I should have vetted Harrison more carefully." Her voice carried genuine regret. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that." "You defended me. Thank you." "He wasn't entirely wrong, though. There is something between us. That's real. And it could complicate things." David pushed off from the car, closing the distance between them. I earned this position on merit. And I'm falling for you. Both things are true. If people want to talk, let them talk. My world can be ruthless, David. There will be more Harrisons. Then we deal with them together. Victoria studied him for a long moment, then smiled, genuine and warm, the careful CEO mask falling away. I want to try this. Us. Really try, not just see where it goes. So do I. They kissed in the parking garage, surrounded by expensive cars and concrete pillars, and it felt like a promise. Whatever complications lay ahead, they'd face them together. The real test came Saturday morning. Victoria had suggested a tech conference for kids at the state university. Robotics, coding, interactive exhibits. Emma had agreed with visible reluctance, and now the three of them sat in Victoria's Mercedes heading across town. Emma was quiet in the back seat, earbuds in, staring out the window. Victoria made conversation about the conference, trying to bridge the gap, but getting minimal response. At the university, exhibits filled the gymnasium. Kids swarmed around tables demonstrating everything from simple circuits to advanced programming. Emma drifted toward a robotics station where participants could build and program small machines to navigate an obstacle course. She struggled with the programming interface, frustration building on her face. Victoria appeared at her elbow. Try this logic loop. See how changing the parameters affects the robot's decision tree. Emma followed the suggestion, and suddenly her robot jerked forward, navigating the first obstacle successfully. I did it! Genuine excitement broke through Emma's reserve. You're a natural. My first robot drove straight into a wall and caught fire. Emma giggled, the sound breaking David's heart with relief. Really? Really. The fire alarm went off and everything. Very embarrassing for a college freshman. They worked on the robot together, Victoria explaining concepts in ways that made sense, Emma asking increasingly complex questions. David watched from a distance, hardly daring to breathe for fear of disrupting the fragile connection forming between them. At lunch in the campus food court, Emma actually initiated conversation. How did you learn to code? Victoria shared her story, teaching herself in public libraries, her mother unable to afford a computer, spending every spare minute at the branch near their apartment complex. My dad says you're really successful now. I am, but success can be lonely sometimes. I don't have what your dad has, a family, people who matter more than quarterly earnings. Emma was quiet, processing. Is that why you like my dad? Victoria met the question head on, no deflection or platitudes. I like your dad because he's kind, brilliant, and makes me laugh. But yes, I also admire what you two have built together. The love between you is something I've always wanted and never found. He's the best dad. I can tell. You're lucky to have him. He's happy when he's with you, Emma admitted, voice small. I'm happy with him too. And with you, if you'll let me be. Emma looked down at her lunch tray, fingers shredding a napkin. I don't want a new mom. I'm not trying to be your mom. Your mom was irreplaceable, and her place in your heart and your dad's heart is sacred. I'd never try to take that. Victoria's voice was gentle but firm. But maybe I could be your friend? No pressure, no expectations, just someone who thinks you're pretty amazing and wants to know you better. Emma considered this, the weight of the decision visible on her young face. Finally, she nodded. Okay, maybe friends. In the car ride home, Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the day's excitement. David caught Victoria's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." She smiled, reaching over to squeeze his hand. From the back seat, Emma's sleepy voice, Dad, Victoria's pretty cool. You should definitely keep her around. David nearly drove off the road. What? I said she's cool. And if you guys get married, I want to help plan the wedding. Victoria laughed, the sound filling the car with warmth and possibility, while David tried to remember how to breathe and drive simultaneously. David's first month as Director of Educational Impact passed in a whirlwind of activity that left him exhilarated and exhausted in equal measure. His office occupied the 23rd floor of Hayes Innovation Headquarters, with windows overlooking the financial district. The desk was larger than his bedroom at home. The chair probably cost more than a month's groceries. And every morning, he still felt like an imposter who'd wandered into the wrong building. But the work made sense. He'd assembled a small team of former teachers, people who understood classrooms from the inside. Together, they designed a pilot literacy program that stripped away the buzzwords and focused on what actually worked. Dedicated reading time, trained specialists, books students wanted to read instead of what looked good in grant proposals. The first pilot school was in Detroit, a middle school serving predominantly low-income students. David flew out on a Tuesday, spent 3 days training teachers, and watched literacy scores climb within the first month. The principal, a weary woman named Dr. Morrison, who'd seen 1,000 initiatives come and go, pulled him aside on his final day. Thank you. Finally, someone who gets it. Someone who's been in the trenches. Flying home, David felt the validation wash over him. This could work. He could actually make a difference on a scale he'd never imagined. But there were costs. He'd missed Emma's soccer game against their crosstown rivals. Stuck in a delayed flight from Atlanta, he'd watched the video Mrs. Patel had filmed from the sidelines. Emma scored the winning goal in the final minutes, her face lighting up as she searched the stands. The moment she realized he wasn't there, the light dimmed. That look haunted him. Victoria called while he sat alone in the airport terminal at midnight, waiting for his rescheduled flight. You sound exhausted. I missed Emma's game. I promised I wouldn't miss the important things. Victoria was quiet for a moment. It's only been a month. You'll find balance. Will I? Or did I make a mistake? The words came out harsher than intended, born of exhaustion and guilt. Do you regret this? The job? A pause, weighted with more than professional concern. Us? No. David rubbed his eyes, the terminal lights too bright. Just harder than I thought it would be. They'd been seeing each other regularly, dinner dates when schedules allowed, coffee meetings that turned into hours of conversation, stolen moments between his travel and her board meetings. But they kept missing connections, their lives operating on different rhythms that refused to sync. 2 weeks later, the Hayes Innovation Foundation held its annual gala at the Grand Meridian, the same hotel where David had met Victoria. Black tie, 500 guests, tickets starting at $1,000 per plate. David rented another tuxedo. Emma wore a new dress Victoria had bought her during a shopping trip that had apparently involved a lot of laughing and very little actual shopping. The ease between them had grown gradually, naturally, until David sometimes forgot to worry about it. In the hotel ballroom, transformed with dramatic lighting and floral arrangements that probably cost more than his car, David felt the familiar displacement. Tech CEOs mingled with old money, discussing acquisitions and market valuations. He recognized several faces from business news, people whose net worth had multiple commas. A technology executive approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. So, David, what did you do before Victoria plucked you from obscurity? The phrasing, plucked from obscurity, landed like a slap. David felt his spine straighten. I taught high school English, changed lives. Quite fulfilling, actually. How quaint. The CEO's tone dripped condescension. And now you're playing in the big leagues. Must be quite an adjustment. Before David could respond, Victoria materialized at his elbow, her voice cold enough to frost glass. David's programs are projected to impact 50,000 students in 3 years. How many lives have you changed lately, Richard? Richard retreated, mumbling something about catching up with someone across the room. Another encounter followed shortly after. An older woman in diamonds that could finance a small school district looked David up and down with barely concealed disdain. Victoria, darling, where did you find this one? Victoria's smile could have cut steel. Doctor, Carter designed our literacy initiative. Harvard's education department wants to study his methodology. The honorific was news to David. Princeton had awarded him an honorary doctorate while he was traveling, something Victoria had arranged without mentioning it. The woman made a hasty exit. David pulled Victoria aside, away from the crowd. You don't have to defend me. I'm not defending. I'm setting the record straight. I don't belong here, Victoria. This isn't my world. Frustration bled into his voice, the accumulation of a month of feeling like a fraud. I taught high school. I drove a 10-year-old car. These people will never see me as anything but your charity case. Victoria's expression flickered with hurt. You're not a charity case. You're the man I love. The declaration hit David like a physical force. They'd been dancing around it for weeks, the feeling growing between them but unspoken. Now it hung in the air of the Grand Meridian Ballroom, unavoidable. What? I love you, David. I have for weeks. Her voice dropped, vulnerability showing through the polished exterior. But look around. Every person here is wondering what I see in you. Doesn't that bother you? I don't care what they think about me, David said, voice tight. But I care what they think about you, about Emma. I don't want her growing up ashamed of who I am. She could never. Emma appeared between them, having overheard from where she'd been standing with Marcus, David's former student, now invited as a success story for the foundation. Emma's face was flushed with indignation. Dad, I'm proud of you. Always. Stop being stupid. Both adults stared at her, shocked. You taught me to be proud of who we are. You said being a good person matters more than being a rich person. Don't change that now just because we're in a fancy room. The reproach from his 12-year-old daughter crystallized something in David's mind. He'd been so worried about fitting in that he'd forgotten his own lessons. Near the stage, the foundation director was fumbling with a microphone, calling for attention to begin the fundraising portion of the evening. David made a decision born of frustration and anger and love for his daughter, watching him with those fierce blue eyes. He crossed to the stage, took the microphone from the startled director. The room quieted, hundreds of faces turning toward him. I'm David Carter. A month ago, I was a high school teacher making $58,000 a year. Tonight, I'm wearing a rented tuxedo, surrounded by people worth more than my entire neighborhood. Silence rippled outward. Victoria stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. But I've taught students you've never met, kids who started the year reading at third grade level and ended reading college texts. Students who believed they were worthless until someone showed them different. David's voice grew stronger, years of classroom projection giving it power. This foundation, it's not about money. Money is easy for people in this room. What matters is giving every kid what wealthy kids get by default. Belief that they matter, that their potential is worth investing in. He looked directly at the audience, meeting eyes across the sea of formal wear. If you donate tonight, know your money will be in the hands of someone who knows what it's like to choose between school supplies and groceries. Someone who will spend every dollar like it's sacred. Because it is. Every dollar represents a kid who might finally get the chance they deserve. The passion poured out of him, unscripted and raw. Everything he'd learned in 14 years of teaching, every frustration with a system that failed its most vulnerable students, every fierce belief that education could transform lives, it all channeled through his words. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Not polite charity gala clapping, but genuine, sustained recognition. Victoria's eyes shone with tears. By evening's end, pledges exceeded the goal by $2 million. Donors lined up to shake David's hand, to ask questions about the programs, to discuss implementation. The dynamic had shifted. He wasn't Victoria's curiosity anymore, but a leader in his own right. Later, in a quiet corner while Emma chatted with Marcus about his college experience, Victoria took David's hand. "You were incredible up there. I was tired of pretending to be something I'm not." The adrenaline was fading, leaving him shaky. "I'm a teacher who got lucky enough to work with someone brilliant. That's the truth, and I'm done apologizing for it." "Don't ever apologize." Victoria kissed him, not caring who might be watching. "That passion, that authenticity, it's why I fell in love with you." "I love you too," David said, the words coming easier now. "All of this, the job, the money, the fancy events, none of it matters as much as you, as Emma, as building something real." Emma appeared at his elbow, grinning. "You guys are being mushy again." They laughed, the tension of the evening dissolving into something warmer. But later that night, alone in his house after Emma fell asleep, David sat in the garage with a box he'd avoided opening for 5 years. Rachel's things, photographs, letters, the sweater she'd worn constantly during chemotherapy. He pulled out their wedding album, tracing her face in the photos, young, healthy, radiant with joy. The woman who'd taught him how to love, how to be a father, how to find meaning in the ordinary moments of life. "I'm forgetting her, Rachel." The confession came out as a whisper. The exact sound of her laugh. The way she hummed off-key when she cooked. The little things that made her, her. They're slipping away. And I'm terrified. Guilt crashed over him in waves. How could he love Victoria when pieces of Rachel were disappearing from his memory? How could he move forward when it felt like betrayal? He didn't hear Victoria arrive. She had a key now, another marker of how entwined their lives had become, until she appeared in the garage doorway. "David?" She found him crying over the wedding album, surrounded by Rachel's belongings. Without a word, Victoria sat beside him on the concrete floor. Heedless of her expensive dress, she waited, present but not pressing, until he could speak. "Tell me about her." So David did. He told Victoria about Rachel's terrible singing, how she'd burned everything except spaghetti, her fierce protectiveness of Emma, her grace during the final terrible months. Every story felt like holding glass, beautiful but sharp, liable to cut if gripped too tight. Victoria listened without jealousy, asking gentle questions, encouraging him to share the memories he'd been hoarding like precious artifacts. "I feel guilty," David admitted when the words ran out. "Loving you feels like I'm replacing her, like I'm being disloyal to everything we had." Victoria picked up a photograph, Rachel laughing at their wedding, caught mid-spin. "You're not replacing her. You're making room for something new. That's different." "What if I forget what we had?" "You won't. Emma won't let you." Victoria's voice was firm. "And neither will I." David looked at her, this powerful woman sitting on his garage floor in a designer gown, surrounded by another woman's memories. "You'd do that?" Keep her memory alive? Of course. She's part of you, part of Emma. She gave you the capacity to love the way you do. I'm grateful to her for that. They sat together as dawn approached, going through the photographs and letters. Victoria asked questions. What was Rachel like in college? How had they met? What were her dreams before illness took them? David answered each one, feeling the memories solidify instead of slip away. By sunrise, the guilt had loosened its grip. Rachel wasn't fading. She was being woven into the fabric of his new life instead of locked away in a box in the garage. She would have liked you, David said as golden light filtered through the garage door. She always said I needed someone who would challenge me, keep me from getting too comfortable. You think I challenge you? Every single day. He kissed her forehead, in the best possible way. 2 months into his new role, David was in San Francisco for a conference when his phone rang at 11 p.m. Mrs. Patel's voice was tight with controlled panic. David, don't panic, but Emma's in the emergency room. The world tilted. What happened? She fell during soccer practice. Possible concussion. The ambulance took her to County General. I'm with her, but she keeps asking for you. David was already pulling up flight information on his laptop. The next available flight wasn't until 6 a.m., 9 hours away. 9 hours while his daughter was hurt and scared and wanted him. I'm getting there as fast as I can. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm coming. After hanging up, David called Victoria despite the late hour. She was in New York for board meetings. I need help. Emma's hurt and I can't get there until morning and... Give me 20 minutes. Victoria cut him off, her voice shifting into executive mode. I'll handle it. Victoria, you're in New York. Trust me. 30 minutes later, a car service picked David up from his hotel. They drove to a private airfield where a chartered jet waited, engines already running. Victoria had arranged everything. Flight plan filed, pilot standing by, spending what had to be tens of thousands of dollars without hesitation. They landed at 3 a.m. David barely remembered the drive to the hospital, his mind cycling through worst-case scenarios. Concussions could be serious. Mrs. Patel met him in the emergency room waiting area, her face lined with exhaustion and relief. She's okay. Mild concussion. The doctor says rest for a week, no screens, monitor for symptoms. She's awake now. David burst through the examination room curtain. Emma lay on the bed, a bandage wrapped around her head, looking small and vulnerable in the hospital gown. Dad! She burst into tears at the sight of him. He gathered her into his arms, feeling her shake with sobs. I'm here, baby. I'm here now. I was so scared. I wanted you. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm so sorry. Guilt threatened to choke him. He'd been in San Francisco celebrating successful pilot program results while his daughter was injured and terrified. Emma noticed Victoria standing quietly near the door. Victoria? You came too? Of course, I was worried about you. Victoria stepped closer, but maintained distance, respecting the father-daughter moment. You flew here in the middle of the night? Wonder crept into Emma's voice. Your dad needed to be here. I helped make that happen. Emma reached out her hand, and Victoria took it, blinking back tears. Thank you. After the doctor discharged Emma with strict instructions and a follow-up appointment, they drove home in the pre-dawn darkness. Emma dozed in the back seat while David and Victoria sat in the front, processing. I can't do this, David said quietly, staring at the empty road ahead. The travel, being away when she needs me. What if it had been worse? What if I'd missed? But you didn't. Victoria's voice was gentle but firm. And it wasn't worse. She's going to be fine. This time. But the job requires travel, Victoria. I can't be a good father from hotel rooms in other cities. Then we restructure your role. David looked at her, confused. What? Work from home 80% of the time. Travel only when Emma's schedule allows. Flexible hours, so you never miss the important things. Victoria met his eyes. You're too valuable to lose, David. The foundation's lucky to have you. But I love you because you're a great father. Don't sacrifice that for anything, including this job. The simplicity of her solution took his breath away. You'd really change the position for me? I'd do anything for you, both of you. Victoria reached over, taking his hand. You're my family now. That matters more than any job description. I love you, David said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. I love you too. All the way. 4 months later, Thanksgiving arrived with the gentle chill of early winter. David's house, never designed for entertaining, overflowed with people. Victoria had moved through his space with appreciation earlier, admiring the bookshelves and family photos, the garden visible through the back windows that he still maintained. This is a real home, she'd said, touching the spine of a worn cookbook. You can feel the love in these walls. Mrs. Patel arrived first, bringing homemade pie. Principal Andrews came with her husband, genuinely interested in David's foundation work. Marcus showed up with his girlfriend, proudly announcing he'd made the dean's list. The small gathering felt organic, comfortable, nothing like the stilted formality of the gala. In the kitchen, Victoria and Emma worked together setting the table, while David basted the turkey according to Rachel's recipe card taped inside the oven. So, when are you and Dad getting married? Emma's voice carried clearly from the dining room. David froze, basting brush in midair. We haven't... That's not... Victoria stammered, the unflappable CEO thrown completely off balance. You should. He's happier than I've ever seen him. And you're here all the time anyway. Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway, face flushed. David met her eyes, both of them somewhere between mortified and amused. Would that be okay with you? Victoria asked Emma seriously. If your dad and I got married? Emma considered, her young face thoughtful. Only if I get to help plan it. And you promise to still be my friend first, not just Dad's wife. Always friends first. Deal? Deal. Dinner was loud and warm, full of laughter and stories. Marcus described his college classes, making David proud of how far his former student had come. Principal Andrews shared updates from Riverside, where David's replacement was implementing some of his methods. Mrs. Patel told embarrassing stories about David from Emma's toddler years. Victoria fit into the gathering seamlessly, no longer the powerful CEO, but simply a woman grateful to be included. After everyone left and Emma went to bed, David and Victoria cleaned up together in comfortable silence. She washed, he dried, their movements synchronized through repetition. Thank you for tonight, Victoria said, handing him a soapy plate. For letting me be part of this. Thank you for wanting to be part of it. David set the plate in the rack. I know your life could be very different. Penthouse dinners, charity galas every weekend, vacations in places I can't pronounce. Victoria turned off the water, facing him fully. I had all that. It was lonely. This family, belonging, a home that feels lived in and loved, this is what I was missing. Not the money or career success, but connection. I never thought I'd have this again, David admitted. After Rachel died, I thought my chance at partnership was over, that I'd be alone, raising Emma, just surviving until she grew up and left. And now? Now I know there's room for both, career and love, success and family. being a good father and being in love with an extraordinary woman. They kissed in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their shared meal, their blended family, their growing life together. From the hallway came Emma's sleepy voice. "You guys are being mushy in there, aren't you?" They laughed, caught, and Emma padded into the kitchen in her pajamas. "Can't sleep?" "I miss Mom sometimes," Emma said quietly, and the admission hung in the warm kitchen air. "Is that okay? Even though I like Victoria?" David knelt down to Emma's level. "Of course it's okay. I miss her too. She'll always be part of us." "I think she'd like Victoria," Emma said, glancing at the woman standing by the sink. "And I think she'd want us to be happy." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Emma walked over and hugged her, and Victoria held David's daughter like she was precious crystal. "Thank you for letting me be here," Victoria whispered into Emma's hair. "You're family now," Emma said simply. "That's what family does." 2 weeks later, Christmas Eve found them decorating David's tree together, a ritual he and Emma had maintained since Rachel's death. This year, Victoria was part of it, hanging ornaments while Emma directed placement with the authority of a museum curator. Rachel's ornaments mixed with new ones Victoria had given Emma, each representing something they'd done together. The robotics conference, a cooking class they'd taken, a bookstore trip that had resulted in more books than any one person could read. The symbolism wasn't lost on David. Old and new coexisting, neither diminishing the other. "I have something for you," Victoria told Emma, producing a wrapped box. Inside was a framed photograph, all three of them at the robotics conference, laughing at something off camera. Their first picture together as a family unit. Emma traced the frame with her finger, tears spilling over. "Our first photo." "First of many, I hope." "Definitely." Then Victoria pulled out a smaller box, her hands trembling slightly as she handed it to David. Inside was a simple gold band, engraved on the inside, "Room for both." David looked up, understanding flooding through him. Victoria knelt, and Emma immediately joined her, both of them facing him. "I promised Emma I wouldn't do this without her approval, so I asked her first, weeks ago." Emma grinned through happy tears. "I said yes immediately." "David's been so nervous." David laughed despite his own tears. "I haven't been nervous. David Carter, 5 months ago, you asked me to dance, and it changed my life." Victoria's voice wavered with emotion. "You've shown me what real partnership looks like, given me purpose beyond quarterly earnings, taught me that opening your heart doesn't mean forgetting the past, it means expanding to include the future." She took a breath. "You've been patient with my schedule, my insecurities, my complete lack of cooking skills. You've let me into your family, into Emma's life, into this beautiful home you've built from love and sacrifice. I'm not asking to replace Rachel. I'm asking to build something new with you. To be Emma's friend, your partner, part of this family that makes room for everyone who matters." Her voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "Will you marry me?" David couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He nodded, and Victoria slipped the ring onto his finger. A perfect fit, like everything else about them. Emma launched herself at both of them. "Group hug!" They collapsed together in a tangle of limbs and laughter, Christmas lights twinkling overhead, Rachel's photo on the mantel seeming to smile down at them. That night, after Emma finally slept from exhaustion and excitement, David and Victoria sat on the back porch despite the December cold. Stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. "I have news," Victoria said, her breath misting in the frigid air. "The foundation board met yesterday. They want to expand your program nationwide." Full rollout to 200 schools over 3 years. David's mind reeled. That's incredible. There's more. The Senate Education Committee wants you to testify about literacy reform. Your work is attracting attention at the highest levels. Me? Testify to Congress? The idea seemed absurd. A high school teacher from Riverside standing in front of senators, influencing national policy. You changed one classroom, then 50 schools. Now you might change the country. Victoria took his hand. Rachel would be proud. I think she would. David looked up at the stars, imagining Rachel somewhere out there, watching. She believed in me first, pushed me to dream bigger than I thought possible. But now you're doing it, living the dreams. Victoria leaned against him. Are you scared? Terrified, excited, grateful. He kissed the top of her head, all of it at once. 6 months later, spring sunshine flooded the park where Rachel had loved to walk, the place she'd taken Emma as a toddler, where she'd told David about her diagnosis, where so many of their important moments had unfolded. Now it hosted their wedding. 30 people gathered on the grass. David's colleagues, Victoria's board members, Emma's friends, Marcus and his girlfriend, Mrs. Patel, Principal Andrews. Small and intimate. Exactly what they wanted. Emma walked Victoria down the aisle, having volunteered for the role after Victoria's mother had passed years ago. The image of his daughter in her junior bridesmaid dress, holding the hand of the woman who'd become so important to both of them, nearly undid David's composure. Victoria wore simple ivory, elegant without ostentation. David wore a navy suit, not a tuxedo, something that felt like himself. The officiant was Principal Andrews, who'd gotten ordained specifically for this occasion. Their vows, written together over weeks of late-night conversations, I promise to challenge you, support you, and love you exactly as you are. To build a family that honors the past while embracing the future, to remember that our love doesn't erase what came before, it expands to include what comes next. Victoria's voice shook slightly. I promise to be your partner, Emma's friend, and the person who reminds you both how extraordinary you are. To never take this gift for granted. To honor Rachel's memory by loving you and Emma with everything I have. When they kissed, Emma cheered loudest. The reception was casual. Picnic tables, food trucks Victoria had hired from local restaurants, Emma's carefully curated playlist. Nothing like the formal gala world Victoria inhabited professionally. This was personal, theirs, authentic. During dinner, Emma stood to give a speech that made everyone cry. My mom died when I was 7. I didn't think I'd ever be okay again. Dad taught me we could be happy even when we're sad. That love doesn't run out just because someone leaves. Victoria taught me that new people in your life don't replace old ones. They make the circle bigger. She looked at Victoria with fierce affection. So today, I'm not losing my dad. I'm gaining a friend. And maybe someday I'll call you something else. But for now, friend is pretty perfect. Victoria was openly weeping. Emma hugged her, and the photographer captured the moment. 2 people who'd been strangers 8 months ago, now family. As evening settled and fairy lights illuminated the park, David and Victoria danced to the same song from the Grand Meridian. Emma swayed nearby with Marcus, who'd become an older brother figure. I almost didn't send that text, David admitted, holding Victoria close. After the wedding where we met, I almost talked myself out of it. I'm glad you didn't. Best text I ever received. Second best for me. Victoria pulled back slightly, curious. What was first? David smiled, looking over at Emma. Rachel, 11 years ago. She texted, I'm pregnant, you're going to be a dad. Nothing's topped that. That's a good one. Victoria rested her head on his shoulder. But this is a close second. They swayed together as the sun set, as their friends and family celebrated around them, as the future they'd built together stretched ahead with all its possibility and promise. Emma appeared at David's elbow. "Can I cut in?" He stepped back, and Emma took Victoria's hands. They danced together, talking quietly, laughing at private jokes. David watched his daughter and his wife, the words still felt new and wonderful, and felt complete in a way he hadn't since Rachel's death. Mrs. Patel appeared beside him, handing him a glass of wine. "She'd be happy for you, Rachel. She'd want exactly this." "I think so too." David watched Emma and Victoria, his two favorite people in the world, building their own relationship independent of him. "I thought moving forward meant leaving her behind, but it doesn't. She's still here, in Emma, in the lessons she taught me about love and sacrifice and being present. And now you have room for both, past and future, memory and new love." "Room for both," David echoed, thinking of the inscription on his wedding band. As the celebration wound down and guests departed with hugs and promises to visit, the photographer gathered them for final shots. David, Victoria, and Emma stood together under the fairy lights, arms around each other, smiling at the camera. But the photographer also captured candid moments. Victoria fixing Emma's hair, David laughing at something his daughter said, all three of them in easy harmony that spoke of genuine affection built over months of small moments. On the drive home, Victoria's Mercedes now, since David's Honda had finally died and been replaced, Emma dozed in the back while David and Victoria held hands across the center console. "1 year ago, I was heading home from that wedding thinking about how lonely I was," Victoria said quietly. "How success felt hollow without anyone to share it with." "1 year ago, I was convinced I'd spend the rest of my life just going through motions," David replied. "Teaching, raising Emma, existing but not really living. And now? Now I know that love doesn't follow a timeline. It doesn't wait until you're ready or ask permission. It just shows up and asks you to dance. And if you're brave enough to say yes, it changes everything." Victoria squeezed his hand. "Best dance I ever had." "Same." At home, they carried a sleepy Emma inside and tucked her into bed. She mumbled something about the wedding being perfect, about being happy, about loving them both, before drifting off completely. In their bedroom, Victoria's belongings now mixed with David's, her elegant minimalism tempering his cluttered comfort. They got ready for bed in comfortable silence. David paused at Rachel's photo on the dresser. He'd been afraid moving it would upset Emma, but his daughter had been the one to suggest placing it where they'd see it every day. "She's part of our family too," Emma had said simply. Now David touched the frame gently. "Thank you for teaching me how to do this, how to love, how to be a partner, how to be brave enough to try again. I hope we're making you proud." Victoria came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "We are. I promise you, we are." They stood there together, honoring the woman who'd shaped David into the man he'd become, the mother who'd given Emma her foundation, the wife whose love had been so complete that it taught David he could love again. Then they climbed into bed, into the life they'd built, into the future stretching ahead with all its uncertainty and promise. Outside, spring rain began to fall, gentle and cleansing. In the morning, David would wake early to make Emma's favorite pancakes, a Sunday tradition they'd never break. Victoria would help, probably burning something despite his careful instruction. Emma would laugh at them both, secure in the knowledge that she was loved completely by two people who'd found each other because they'd both had the courage to keep their hearts open. The foundation board meeting was scheduled for Monday to discuss the national expansion. David's congressional testimony was 3 weeks away, a chance to advocate for policies that could help millions of students like Marcus, like the kids he'd taught for 14 years, like every child who needed someone to believe in their potential. But all of that was tomorrow. Tonight was just this: warm bed, rain on the windows, the woman he loved beside him, his daughter safe down the hall, and a heart big enough to hold both past and future without diminishing either. David fell asleep smiling, Rachel's memory a blessing instead of a burden, Victoria's presence a gift he'd stopped questioning, and Emma's love the thread connecting it all. Some stories didn't end so much as they transformed, opening into new chapters while honoring what came before. This was one of those stories, not an ending, but a beginning disguised as a conclusion. A dance that started with a simple invitation and grew into a lifetime of choosing each other every single day.